What kind of man was meant to find her? And what was he supposed to do once he did? The Kansas prairie lay flat and unforgiving beneath the late sun, the heat pressing down like a held breath that never quite released. Sam Carter rode with his head low, reins loose in his hands, moving by habit more than intention, the way a man did when the land knew him better than his own thoughts. The grass was burned pale from weeks without rain, the river cutting a dull line through it, slow and shallow, more memory than water. He might have passed her without stopping. A darker shape in the grass meant nothing out here. Dead cattle, broken fence posts, things the land claimed back without ceremony. But something about the stillness stopped him. Not the shape itself, but the way it didn't belong. He dismounted and walked closer, boots crunching softly, the cicadas buzzing loud enough to fill the silence. That was when he saw the rope. Crude knots, pulled tight, biting into skin that had gone red and swollen beneath the strain. A young woman lay on her side, wrists bound behind her, ankles drawn together, dress torn and dirt-streaked, the white fabric clinging to her as if the heat itself had decided to expose her. Her hair was matted with sweat and dust. She was alive. Barely. She flinched when his shadow crossed her face. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse, cracked from thirst and fear. "Don't look at me." The words hit harder than the sight. Sam froze, suddenly aware of where he stood, of how easily a man's gaze could become another injury. He turned his head at once, stepping back as if he'd crossed some invisible line. He shrugged out of his coat, folded it, and laid it across her legs without touching her skin. The gesture felt small, almost useless, but it mattered. He knelt then, still looking away, and unscrewed his canteen. "Drink slow," he said. His voice came out rough, unused. "You'll make yourself sick if you rush it." She drank, gasping between careful sips, water spilling down her chin. Sam waited. He listened to the wind comb through the grass, to the dull thud of his own heartbeat. This wasn't an accident. He knew that as clearly as he knew the lay of his fences. No one tied a person like this and left them in the open by mistake. Leaving her alive was the point. Leaving her seen. When she had enough breath to speak again, she told him her name was Eleanor Brooks. "Ellie," she said, like the shorter version, hurt less. She tried to smile, failed, then laughed weakly at herself, as if humor might hold her together long enough to keep from breaking apart. Sam told her his name. Nothing more. Names were enough for now. Her wrists were raw, skin torn where she had struggled. The rope had been good hemp, new enough not to fray. Someone had planned this. Sam felt the anger then, slow and heavy, settling behind his ribs. He had known cruelty all his life, but this was something else. This was careful. "I work at the Abene depot," she said after a while, eyes fixed on the sky. "I was headed there this morning." Sam stayed quiet. He knew better than to hurry a story like this. "I heard things," Ellie continued. "Men talking like I wasn't there, about land, about you." She swallowed. "They said you wouldn't sell, said you were stubborn, said stubborn men needed reminders." The word reminders lingered in the air. Sam looked out across the prairie, half expecting to see movement, a glint of metal, anything that would confirm what his instincts were already shouting. This wasn't about her. Not really. She was the message. He was the target. When he reached for the knife at his belt to cut the rope at her ankles, the first shot cracked the air. Dirt jumped near his boot. Another shot followed, closer this time. Sam dropped flat, pulling Ellie down with him, his body shielding hers as if that could stop a bullet. He cut fast then, fingers sure despite the rush of adrenaline, the rope falling away as more shots rang out, spaced and deliberate. Not wild, patient. "Can you crawl?" he asked. She nodded, eyes wide, fear sharp but focused. He pressed the knife into her hand. "If it comes to it, you use this. You don't wait." They moved low, dragging themselves through the grass toward the shallow cut of the creek, the land offering just enough cover if you knew how to use it. Sam kept his head down, counting shots, listening for movement. Whoever was out there wasn't rushing. That was worse. That meant confidence. The line shack came into view like a promise made of rotting wood and rusted tin. They reached it breathless, slipping inside, the shade wrapping around them like a held breath finally released. Inside, the air was cooler, dust motes hanging in the slanted light. Ellie leaned against the wall, shaking now that the danger had paused, the delayed tremor of survival. Sam handed her a clean shirt from his saddlebag and turned away while she changed. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "There's one man," she said, "Thomas Hale." The name landed between them with the weight of a dropped tool. Sam closed his eyes for a brief second. Tom Hale, Flying M. Brand. A man who had ridden his fences, shared his meals, shaken his hand like it meant something. Betrayal didn't arrive loud. It came quiet, wearing a familiar face. Outside, boots crunched in the dirt. Voices followed, calm, almost conversational. Tom's voice carried easily, confident, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. He stepped into view, two men flanking him, rifles held loose, smiles thin. "I told you you'd come," Tom said. "You always do the right thing, Sam. That's what makes you predictable." Sam stepped forward, placing himself between Tom and Ellie, his body a line drawn in the dust. The trap was set. The choice had been made the moment he dismounted. Some men walked away. Some didn't. Tom waited for him to bend. Sam didn't. "No," he said. It was the quietest word he knew. It was enough. The word still hung between them when the first rifle lowered. Tom Hale studied Sam the way a man studies weather, not surprised, just measuring how bad it might get. He didn't rush. He never had. That had always been his strength, the way he made other men move first while he stood still, smiling like patience itself. The two riders beside him shifted their weight, boots scraping softly, fingers loose on triggers. They were ready, but they were waiting for a signal. Tom liked witnesses. He liked moments that proved something. Ellie stood behind Sam, the borrowed shirt hanging awkwardly on her thin frame, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. She could hear her own pulse, loud as hoofbeats. Every instinct told her to hide, to shrink back into the shadows of the shack. But she didn't. She had already been used once today. She would not be silent again. "You shouldn't have stopped," Tom said mildly. "Could have ridden on, left her to the sun. Nobody would have blamed you." Sam didn't turn his head. "You would have." Tom smiled at that, thin and pleased. "That's right. I would have." The truth of it settled heavy in the room. Tom took a step closer, stopping just outside the doorway, careful not to crowd Sam. This was still a conversation. For now. "You see, this wasn't about her," he said, nodding toward Ellie as if she were a piece of misplaced equipment. "It was about reminding you how things work." Ellie's voice cut through before Sam could answer. "I heard you at the depot," she said. It surprised her how steady it sounded. "I heard all of you, talking about the rail spur, about forcing the sale once the county backed it, about how Sam Carter wouldn't have a choice once he was scared enough." Tom's eyes flicked to her then, sharp with interest. Not anger, appraisal. "You shouldn't have listened," he said. "I was sweeping the floor," Ellie shot back. "I didn't have to try." The memory rose unbidden, clear as the day it happened. The men leaning close over the counter, voices low but careless, confident in their power. Maps spread out, fingers tapping at lines that cut through land she knew by heart. Words like condemnation, easement, progress spoken as if they were clean things. And then the laughter, easy and cruel, when one of them joked about how shame worked better than bullets, how a message sent once could last a lifetime. "They said if a man finds a woman like that," Ellie continued, her eyes locked on Tom now, "he either walks away, or he becomes part of it. They said you'd never walk away." Tom chuckled softly. "See, I told them you were predictable." Sam felt the pull then, the deep, familiar urge to end it fast. He could see the angles, the way the men were standing, the way Tom favored his left leg. He had lived long enough to know how violence solved things. He also knew what it cost. He kept his hands loose at his sides, voice level. "You're counting on me doing something stupid." Tom shrugged. "I'm counting on you doing something honest. Same thing most days." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tin roof. Ellie took a step forward, surprising them both. "You think this was clean?" she said. "You think you didn't already cross something you can't uncross?" Tom's smile faltered, just a fraction. "You don't get to lecture me. I get to tell the truth," she said. "You tied me up like an animal and left me to be found because you were afraid to kill me, afraid of what it would cost you, afraid someone might ask why." That landed harder than Sam's refusal. Tom's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Ellie said. "Enough to tell the marshal. Enough to tell every man who thinks selling his land is the only way to stay alive." One of the riders shifted uneasily. Tom noticed. He always did. Control was his currency, and he felt it slipping. He stepped fully into the shack now, boots crossing the threshold, his voice dropping. "You won't make it that far." Sam moved with him, matching the distance, keeping himself between Tom and Ellie. "You sure about that?" For a moment, no one spoke. The tension stretched thin, humming. Tom's eyes flicked past Sam, toward the open prairie, toward the long, empty road that led back to town. He had planned this carefully. The timing, the isolation. What he hadn't planned on was Ellie finding her voice, or Sam choosing to stand still. "You think this is about land," Tom said quietly. "It's about order. Men like you don't fit anymore. You hold things still when they need to move." Sam's expression didn't change. "Funny. Sounds like fear to me." That did it. Tom's hand twitched, not enough to draw, but enough to tell the men beside him that the moment was coming. Ellie felt it too, the way the air tightened. She reached for the knife Sam had given her, fingers brushing the worn handle. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. She just needed them to know she wasn't helpless anymore. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hooves. Tom's head snapped up. The riders stiffened. The sound grew louder, multiple horses, coming fast. Dust rose in the distance, a low cloud against the pale sky. Sam allowed himself a slow breath. He hadn't been sure they'd come. He'd hoped. Tom cursed under his breath. "You had help," he said. Sam finally looked at him then. "Always did. You just forgot." The first rider crested the rise, flying M brand clear on his shoulder. Then another, and another. Familiar faces, hard-lined, angry. The sound of authority followed close behind, the distinct call of a marshal asserting himself before bullets could. The balance shifted in a heartbeat. Tom looked around, calculation giving way to something darker. Not fear, regret, not for what he'd done, but for how it had ended. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her legs trembled, but she stayed upright, eyes forward. Sam felt it then, the quiet certainty that this part was over. Not the fight, not the consequences, just this moment of being hunted. He glanced back at Ellie just once. "You did good," he said. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm not done." Neither of them were. Gunfire did not end when help appeared. It changed shape. The riders pulled Tom Hale and his men back from the line shack without ceremony, rifles still raised, eyes sharp. But the prairie did not soften just because justice had arrived. Sam felt it in the way the air stayed tight, the way sound carried too clean across open ground. Men like Tom never worked alone. They left ripples. Someone would be watching. Someone always was. Marshal Dawson made quick decisions, the kind born of years spent keeping order where there wasn't much to work with. Tom and his riders were bound and set between two horses, pointed toward town. The marshal wanted to move fast, before daylight burned away what advantage surprise still gave them. Sam listened, nodded, said little. Ellie stood close beside him, arms wrapped around herself, the borrowed shirt fluttering faintly in the breeze. She looked smaller now that the shouting had stopped, the shock creeping back in where adrenaline had held it off. "You don't have to come," the marshal told her, not unkindly. "We'll get statements later." Ellie shook her head. "I won't stay here." Sam understood that without asking. Places remembered things. So did bodies. "She rides with me," he said. They left the line shack behind and moved across open land, a thin procession cutting through the pale grass. The sun hung low, heat still pressing down, shadows stretching long and narrow. Sam rode with Ellie in front of him, her back straight, hands tight on the saddle horn. He could feel the tremor through the leather. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. A bird lifting from the grass, the creak of tack. Somewhere, a distant shot echoed. Not aimed. A signal. "They're letting us know," Ellie said quietly. Sam didn't answer, but he adjusted their course, angling toward the shallow bends of the creek, keeping what little cover the land offered. Being hunted didn't always mean running. Sometimes it meant refusing to be predictable. The second shot came closer. Dirt jumped ahead of them, close enough that Ellie flinched hard. Sam leaned forward, his voice low in her ear. "Breathe! Don't lock up!" She nodded, breath coming shallow but steadying as she forced it to slow. Trust was not something either of them had planned for today. It arrived anyway, built in small, necessary moments. His hand on the reins when her grip slipped, her weight shifting with his without thinking. Fear stripped things down to what mattered. Right now, it was staying upright. Staying alive. They pushed the horses harder. Not full gallop, not yet. Sam counted terrain, not heartbeats. A shallow rise. A cut in the land where rainwater sometimes ran. A stand of scrub that might hide a man, or hide them. Another shot cracked. Closer still, the sound sharp, clean. Whoever was firing knew what they were doing. They wanted pressure. They wanted panic. Ellie turned her head slightly. "They don't care if they hit me." "No," Sam said. "They care if they slow us." She absorbed that, jaw tightening. The thought didn't break her. It hardened something. She shifted in the saddle, sitting taller. When the next shot rang out, she didn't flinch. She watched the land instead, the way Sam did, searching for patterns, for tells. They reached the creek bend and dropped down, water flashing dull in the sun. Sam urged the horse through without stopping, letting the splash mask the sound of their passage for a second, then climbed the far bank at an angle. He felt it then, the shift, the way pursuit hesitated. They were still being watched, but the line had blurred. Plain sight wasn't as simple when the land itself decided to help. They rode on, the heat finally beginning to break, the sky deepening toward evening. The gunfire stopped, not because the threat had passed, but because distance had changed the rules. Sam slowed them at last, letting the horses breathe. Ellie sagged slightly, the tension draining enough to leave exhaustion behind. She laughed once, short and surprised, then pressed her hand to her mouth as if embarrassed by the sound. "I didn't think I could do that," she said. "You didn't know you'd have to," Sam replied. She looked at him then, really looked. The lines in his face, the dust ground into his skin, the steadiness that hadn't wavered since the moment he'd chosen not to turn away. There was something there that felt dangerously close to comfort. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter. Recognition. Two people standing in the same fire, seeing each other clearly because there was nowhere else to look. When they stopped to water the horses, Ellie slid down stiffly, legs shaking. Sam reached for her without thinking, steadying her by the elbow. She didn't pull away. She leaned into the contact for just a second longer than necessary, then straightened, a flush rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with heat. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't," Sam cut in gently. "You don't owe anyone clean edges after a day like this." They shared the last of the water, the silence between them no longer empty. In the distance, the town lay waiting, a cluster of buildings barely visible against the horizon. Safety was not guaranteed there. It never was. But it was closer than it had been. As they mounted up again, Ellie glanced back once, toward the stretch of land where she had been left to be found. The grass looked no different now. That frightened her more than anything else. Sam saw the look and understood. "It doesn't get to keep you," he said. "Not like that." She nodded, eyes bright but dry. I know. They rode on as the light faded, hunted still, but not alone. Whatever waited ahead would have to reckon with that. Fear had brought them together. Choice was keeping them there. They reached the outskirts of town just as the sky began to bruise into evening, the heat loosening its grip but not its memory. Horses stood tied along the boardwalk. Men gathered in low clusters, talk moving faster than news ever should. Word traveled ahead of them, carried by dust and fear. By the time Sam swung down and helped Ellie dismount, eyes were already on them. Not curious eyes, knowing ones. Marshal Dawson took Tom Hale inside the office first, his hand firm on Tom's arm, his voice calm in the way that promised consequences. The other men were separated, watched closely. No one resisted. Resistance had never been Tom's way. He believed in pressure, not force, in bending things slowly until they broke on their own. Sam stayed outside with Ellie, keeping her close without touching her, letting her decide the distance. She leaned against the hitching post, exhaustion settling deep into her bones now that movement had stopped. The town felt louder than the prairie, every sound sharp and too near. A door slammed. Someone laughed. Life went on as if the day hadn't nearly ended two of them. I need you to tell him everything, Dawson said quietly to Ellie before going in. Every word you heard, every name. Ellie nodded, swallowing. I will. Inside the marshal's office, Tom sat with his hat on his knee, posture relaxed, legs crossed at the ankle like a man waiting for a late supper. He looked up when Sam entered, his expression almost fond. I wondered if you'd come in, he said. Figured you might. Sam didn't sit. He stayed standing, hands loose at his sides, the same way he'd stood in the shack. Distance mattered. You always liked an audience. Tom smiled. Only when it's worth something. Ellie stepped in behind Sam, the room suddenly smaller for her presence. Tom's eyes flicked to her again, lingering this time, not with hunger, but calculation. You surprised me, he admitted. Most people don't survive being scared like that. That wasn't the plan? She asked. Tom tilted his head. Survival was optional. The words landed clean and cold. Sam felt them like a strike meant for him. You did this to make a point, he said. Not to get land, not even to make money. Tom leaned back. Land's just dirt if you don't control the man standing on it. The truth of that filled the room, heavy and undeniable. Tom had ridden with Sam for years, shared coffee at dawn, watched storms roll in from the same porch. He knew Sam's habits, his limits, his quiet pride. That was the betrayal, not the gunman, not the ropes. The intimacy of knowing exactly how to hurt someone without leaving marks that showed. You wanted me to find her, Sam said. You wanted me to see what happens when I don't play along. I wanted you to choose, Tom corrected. Walk away, or step in and prove you're just as trapped as everyone else. Ellie's hands curled into fists. You used me. Tom shrugged. I used the truth. Shame works because people let it. Sam's voice dropped. You're not breaking me. You're showing yourself. For the first time, Tom's smile thinned to nothing. You think this ends with me in a cell? You think the men behind this disappear because you feel righteous? He leaned forward now, elbows on his knees. This was never about winning today. It was about taking something out of you that doesn't grow back. Silence followed. Outside, boots passed on the boardwalk. A horse snorted. Ordinary sounds, grounding and cruel in their normalcy. Ellie stepped forward then, past Sam's shoulder, meeting Tom's gaze head on. You didn't take it, she said. You showed it. Tom studied her, something unreadable passing through his eyes. You're braver than I gave you credit for. No, she replied. I'm just done being quiet. That was the moment Sam understood what Tom had miscalculated. He had believed fear moved in only one direction. He had never learned what happened when it turned around. Marshal Dawson returned, papers in hand, expression set. You're being held for assault, conspiracy, and attempted murder, he said evenly. More if what she says checks out. Tom rose without protest, setting his hat back on his head. He looked at Sam one last time. You'll still lose, he said. Maybe not today, but it's coming. Sam met his gaze, steady as ever. Maybe, he said, but not like this. Tom was led away, boots echoing down the hall, the sound fading until it was gone. What remained was the hollow space where trust had been, the ache of knowing how close betrayal had lived to home. Outside, night settled in, cooler and darker, the town lamps flickering to life. Ellie sat on the steps, shoulders sagging now that the weight had shifted. Sam joined her, leaving space between them that felt intentional, respectful. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I will be." They sat there as the sky deepened, neither speaking for a while. The land hadn't changed. The fight wasn't over. But something had been named, dragged into the light. Betrayal lost some of its power when it no longer hid. Sam looked out toward the dark line of the prairie beyond the town. Tom had wanted to break him, to prove that decency was weakness. Instead, he'd forced a reckoning. Not just with enemies, but with what it meant to stand still when everything told you to run. Ellie broke the silence. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not turning away." Sam nodded once. "There are things a man doesn't walk past," he said. The night listened. The story wasn't done yet. Morning came slowly, as if the town itself were reluctant to wake and face what had been named the night before. The light crept in low and pale, touching rooftops, hitching posts, the hard-packed dirt of the street where too many choices had already been made by men who believed a force was the only language worth speaking. Sam was awake before dawn, seated on the edge of the narrow bed in the room Marshal Dawson had arranged for Ellie. He had slept little, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that some lines, once crossed, could never be stepped back over. Ellie stirred as the light shifted, pulling herself upright, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes clearer than the day before, but still marked by what she carried. She didn't ask why Sam was there. She understood already. Survival was quieter now, but no less real. Downstairs, the town gathered in fragments. Ranch hands from Flying M stood near the stable, hats low, voices measured. Other men hovered at a distance, watching, deciding which side of the line they belonged on now that it had been drawn in daylight. Community was not loud when it mattered. It showed up, it stayed. Marshal Dawson moved through them with purpose, directing, organizing, making order where fear might have spread if left alone. Tom Hale was still in custody, his confidence stripped down to something thin and sharp, his influence reduced to whispers that no longer traveled far. The men who had ridden with him were being questioned, names written down, connections traced. It wasn't justice yet. It was the beginning of it. Sam stepped outside with Ellie beside him. The sun had warmed the air just enough to take the edge off the night. She paused on the steps, breathing it in, as if checking whether the world still allowed that simple act. Sam waited. He always did. "They'll ask me to stay," Ellie said quietly. "To testify, to repeat it all again." "And will you?" Sam asked. She nodded. "Yes. If I don't, this just becomes another story people tell themselves to feel safe." Sam watched the men across the street, some meeting his gaze, others looking away. He saw the calculation there, the same kind Tom had relied on. Power lasted only as long as no one challenged it. Today, someone had. A ranch hand approached, older, sun-worn, eyes steady. "We're riding back with you," he told Sam. "Not because you need guarding, because it's time folks remember whose land that is." Sam inclined his head. No speeches, no thanks. The understanding was enough. Ellie reached into her pocket and pulled out the knife Sam had given her. She held it out to him, handle first. "I don't think I need this anymore." Sam didn't take it right away. "Keep it," he said. "Not for fighting, for remembering." She closed her fingers around it, nodding. They stood there for a moment longer, the noise of the town rising around them, life resuming in careful steps. When Sam finally turned toward his horse, Ellie felt the pull of something she hadn't expected. Not romance shaped by fantasy, but connection forged under pressure, honest and unadorned. "Sam," she said. He stopped, looked back. "Whatever happens next," she continued, choosing her words, "you didn't just save me out there. You showed me what saying no can look like." He considered that, then answered simply, "It doesn't look like much most days." They rode out together, not fleeing, not chasing, just moving forward. The prairie stretched wide and indifferent, the same land that had witnessed cruelty now watching quiet resolve pass through it. The danger hadn't vanished. It rarely did. But it had shifted, unsettled by the refusal of one man and the decision of others to stand with him. As the town fell away behind them, Ellie glanced once more at the horizon, not with fear this time, but with something steadier. Sam rode beside her, the rhythm of the horses unbroken. Whatever came next would be met the same way the first choice had been. Not with noise, not with force alone, but with the quiet strength of knowing where you stood and refusing to be moved. Later, when the dust settled and the sounds of that day softened into memory, people would speak of what happened in ordinary terms. They would say a man was arrested, a crime exposed, a wrong addressed. They would not talk much about the pauses, the moments where nothing seemed to happen but everything changed. They would not mention the way a decision formed in silence, or how courage sometimes arrived without raising its voice. Sam would return to his land, to fences that still needed mending and mornings that asked for steady hands. Ellie would remain for a while, lending her words to the truth, letting time stitch her back together in ways no one else could see. Their paths would cross again, not because fate demanded it, but because choice had already done its quiet work. And when night came and the prairie cooled, the world would seem almost gentle for a moment. Not healed, not perfect, just held at a careful distance from the edge. Somewhere between the dark and the light, a lesson would remain, simple and unremarkable on the surface, that when enough people decide not to look away, when one voice is willing to say no and others choose to stand close, decency does not disappear. It waits, it endures, and sometimes, against all expectation, it wins. End of article. Good night.